Hi, I'm Susan Nazario. I am your presenter for this professional development entitled The Learner Focused Classroom. In this PD, we're going to be covering the learner-centered approach, creating learning outcomes, posting standards, aligned learning, and culturally relevant instruction. So let's begin with a learner-centered approach. So a learner-centered approach views learners as active agents. Your students bring their own knowledge, past experiences, education, and ideas, and this impacts how they take on board new information and learn. This is going to differ significantly from a traditional instructor-centered approach. You cannot view yourself as the expert whose job is to impart all relevant information. In order to ensure that you are actively involving and engaging your students, you must begin each of your lessons with a learning outcome. So learning outcomes are statements that describe the knowledge or skills your student should acquire by the end of a particular assignment, class, course, or program, and help your students understand why that knowledge and those skills will be useful to them. Your outcomes should focus on the context and potential applications of knowledge and skills. They should help your students connect learning in various contexts and help guide assessment and evaluation in your classroom. Explicitly stated learning goals give your students a way to think and talk about what they have learned. They make it easier for your students to know what they know and give your students a language to communicate what they know to others. So let's look at writing student outcomes. Student learning outcomes should be clear, observable, and measurable. And they should also reflect what will be included. The steps to do this is to make sure there is one and only one measurable verb in each objective, so that way if a student doesn't meet both, you don't have any confusion as to which part of your objective they didn't meet. We want to use verbs at the highest Bloom's taxonomy level as possible, and we wanted to write it in terms that our students are going to understand. And one easy way to help students see their success is through I can statements. And these statements are clear statements that identify each goal that is necessary in order for there to be success. So let's take a look at each of Bloom's levels and some key verbs that can help you write these I can statements. At the bottommost layer, which is really where we don't want to spend a lot of time in our classroom, we are looking at remember. So we're asking our students to list or outline, define, or label. I'm a science teacher, so an example would be I can recite Newton's 3 laws of motion. The next level would be understand. It's where we're asking our students to describe, explain, or interpret. So I can describe Newton's 3 laws of motion in my own words. The next level would be to apply. This is where we're actually asking our students to calculate or solve things, illustrate on their own, present. I can calculate the kinetic energy of a projectile. The next level is analyze. We're asking our students to classify, to criticize, to compare and contrast, to participate in experiments. So I can differentiate between potential and kinetic energy. For evaluate, we're asking our students to judge, to select, to evaluate, to defend. I can determine whether using conservation of energy or conservation of momentum would be more appropriate for solving a dynamics problem. And the very highest level at Bloom's is when we're asking our students to create. This is when we truly know that they understand what we've taught. We're asking them to design or build or invent, to create something, to author something. I can design an original homework problem dealing with the principle of conservation of energy. All right, so I would like for you to pause the video at this point because now it's your turn. I want you to think of a unit that you are currently teaching or will be teaching and see if you can write an I can statement at each level of Bloom's taxonomy. So go ahead and pause the video, take a moment to do that, and come right back with me. All right, welcome back. So before you can help your students master the standards, you need to know your standards that you're required to teach. If you're going to use our state and county resources, make sure you're looking through the North Carolina Department of Instruction for the standard course of study. Go to Cumberland County Schools, Curriculum Instruction, and identify the pacing guide. And then make sure that you're identifying the standards that you're required to teach for your grade level and your content area. And then once you have those standards, you want to make sure that you're posting these standards as well as your outcomes or I can statements, because posting them will guide your students as they work, and it also helps them to assess their learning progress. So some creative ways that you can post them. You see some visuals on the right, but I really want you to think about what system you can use to post your standards and statements that will make it easier for you to keep them current. Needs to be something that you know that you would be able to do at the beginning of every unit or every lesson or every week, whatever system works for you. The top left picture is actually the dry erase board in my classroom. I am not a super huge fan of my handwriting, so I actually have printed all of my essential questions, standards, I can statements, vocabulary needed, and I just printed them out, put magnets on the back, and then I just hang them on my board and I change them out with every unit. You can see the picture on the right uses a flip system so that they can be changed, and the photo at the bottom actually is showing a grid that's divided up where the teacher can handwrite inside. Again, whatever is easiest for you, make sure that you find a system that you can consistently use throughout the year. Again, it's your turn. I want you to take a moment to search for some more ideas online. Think of a system that you really know that you'll be able to work on and create it. If you're going to print out those standards, take the time to do it now so that it's already implemented in your classroom. See you in a bit. Welcome back. Now let's talk about aligned learning. Alignment is when there is consistency across your classroom with precise connections between evaluations, course goals, and learning tasks. It's important to align learning objectives with instructional strategies and assessments. So it's great that you know your standards, you've got them posted in your classroom, and the goal of a standards-based classroom is to provide each of your students with an opportunity to produce evidence of your grade level content standards. This is no small feat. First, you have to understand the level of thinking and evidence required by the standards. You have to create tasks aligned to the cognitive complexity. And lastly, ensure your students' evidence of thinking is reaching the standard that you have set for them. You have to ensure that there is not a disconnect between your student task and your learning target. So teachers do a really great job of creating these standards and posting them, but then when it comes to the learning task, it doesn't match the standard or is not aligned with the assessment that is going to come up at the end. So you want to make sure that both are happening. So how do we create tasks aligned to the standards? Well, you have to purposely plan. You're going to have to use research-based strategies. So as stated early in our PD, first step is identifying that learning target. You want to unpack your grade level content standard into smaller chunks so that way you have that learning target for your students. Next, you're going to want to determine the cognitive complexity of the unpacked targets. What does that mean? That's what we looked at before. We're going to use those research-based taxonomies. Bloom's is the one that I was showing, but you can use Webb's or Marzano. Number 3, you want to determine what evidence you will need students to produce. Think about these questions. What does this target look like and sound like when your students are successful? What types of tasks would get you the evidence that you need? Let's take a look at a couple of quick assessments that you can do. We talk about exit tickets a lot. So what does that mean? It just simply means post a simple question to all of your students prior to the class ending. Students can write their answers or type out their answers on the computer, and they hand it in as they exit. And you want to just have some basic questions that will let you assess their learning for the day. And it doesn't always have to be a specific question, like a test type question. It could be, what is the most important learning from the day and why? What was the most surprising concept to what we did today? What was the most confusing topic today? Something I think might appear on a test would be. So that would be your exit ticket. Next are the do's and don'ts. So this is just asking your kids to list 3 do's, 3 don'ts when using, applying, or relating the content. The third one is a yes or no chart, and that's when we're going to ask our students, write what you do and don't know about a given topic, and the students have to be very specific. Yes, I know this. No, I don't know this. Venn diagram, we know that's great for comparing, but we can, instead of just picking 2 things from the day and comparing and contrasting them, we can actually have them compare the content from today from a tangent topic that they learned earlier in the year or even from last year. Self-directed response, that's when our students are asking to prove what they understand. They can do it in a diagram, they can write it or some related form, but we basically say, I want you to create it in a way that a stranger can understand, someone who wasn't in our classroom today. Think, pair, share, that's when we ask a question of the class and we ask the students to think about it, write down their answer. Then they get a buddy and they're paired together and they discuss their answers. And after their pairs have had a chance to discuss their answers amongst themselves, then they share in class. And this is really, really great when you have students that are your struggling learners or confused about a topic and you pair them with a student that has a better understanding so that they both can share and take ownership of the answer together. And finally is 3, 2, 1, and that's where the students write 3 things that they didn't know before you started your lesson, 2 things that surprised them about the topic, and 1 thing that you want or they want to start doing with what they've learned. So these are just some quick assessments that would be some tasks that would be aligned to the standards that you set in your classroom. All right, now your turn again. Go ahead and pause this video and I want you to select one that you think you would be able to implement right away and then come back to me. Great, now let's look at number 4. And number 4 says design a task that requires students to produce evidence at the complexity level of the standard. What do we mean by that? That is looking at those research-based strategies again, identifying a strategy that will get kids thinking and producing at the target level that you have set for them. Let's take a look at how we can apply that with Bloom's. Again, we don't want to stay in the remember too long, but sometimes it's applicable to what we're doing in the classroom for that day. If I'm doing, let's say, some reading tasks in the classroom at this level, I might just have my students match character names and profiles. At understand, I will have my students retell the story in their own words. Application, we're transferring the main character to a brand new setting. Do you understand the true character traits and the nature of that character to look like, to show what it would look like if they were in a different setting of the story? For analyze, we can ask our students to differentiate fact from opinion in a text. Evaluate, write a review of the text expressing your personal opinion on it. And then at create, remember our highest level where we really want to get our students, we are going to have us imagine that they are one of the characters and write a diary entry. Number 5 is to plan the structure of the task. So you need to ask yourself, are my students going to be completing this task independently, in pairs, or groups? What conditions or routines are you going to already have to have set in place for you to set up your students for success? What texts and resources are you going to have your students have access to? Plan that structure. And finally is number 6. Determine teacher actions. What are you going to do? How will you prepare your students to be ready for the task? How will you collect formative data points during the instruction to make sure that you are monitoring and adjusting throughout your lesson? And what scaffolded supports do you need to have ready if your students get stuck? So when we looked at aligned learning, like all good coaches, the teacher has a carefully designed game plan. Now the players, which are the students, they have to execute that plan. And during the game, the coach calls the plays, players execute, and the coach evaluates to make adjustments based on performance. Well, similarly, the teacher provides the learning prompt, observes and monitors student work, and makes adaptations based on performance. And just as the coach is collecting data on each play, the teacher is collecting data during the lesson. And because the plan is so strong, the teacher is now free to focus on student evidence. He or she can give more time to students who need personalized support based on leading in the moment data. So it's not just important to set those targets and create those learning tasks, but it's to monitor and change them as your students need them so they can be successful. The final piece of our professional development is culturally relevant instruction, and this is based on culturally relevant teaching, which was first described in 1994 by Gloria Ladson-Billings. She's an education researcher who wanted this to mean a pedagogy that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. She suggests that we need to reframe how we think about and teach students, especially those that are typically marginalized by the greater society, from a place of need or as a problem to be fixed, to a place that acknowledges the cultural richness and the assets that our students bring into the classroom and society. Culturally relevant teaching, also known as culturally responsive teaching, is based on the following principles: academic success, cultural competence, and sociopolitical consciousness. So the first principle, academic success, is that we want our learners to grow intellectually. While seemingly obvious, the unconscious biases we educators harbor can actually sabotage our best intentions. For example, research shows that we call on poor performers less often and spend less time waiting for them to answer. The second principle, cultural competence, is that we introduce students to the global perspectives found in the greater scientific community and the world. Students can then celebrate not only their own cultures, but learn new perspectives as well. And the third and final principle, socio-political consciousness, involves helping students to apply their learning to solving some of the world's pressing problems. So this pedagogy recognizes the importance of including students' cultural references in all aspects of learning. So why is culturally relevant instruction so important? Well, over the past few decades, students, their experience, upbringings, and backgrounds have changed. Classrooms now reflect families of varying races, cultures, and socioeconomic statuses. And as a result, the way we educate our students must change too. This is an important teaching approach for everyone in our classroom. And when it's done right, it can be quite transformative. When integrated into classroom instruction, culturally responsive strategies can have important benefits, such as strengthening our students' sense of identity, promoting equity and inclusivity in the classroom, engaging students in the course material, and supporting critical thinking. So let's look at some top strategies. Let's begin with activate students' prior knowledge. Your students are not blank slates. They enter your classroom with diverse experiences, and you should encourage your students to draw on their prior knowledge in order to contribute to group discussions, which provides an anchor to learning. Next, we have make learning contextual. So contextual teaching makes learning relevant to the community outside the classroom, and it shows your students how they can apply the knowledge they've learned in the class and that they've gained in their everyday lives. And that instruction, as it suggests, refers to teaching your students the content in a context. We want to embed the concepts in meaningful activities and in a scenario that makes sense to your students to enhance their understanding, to make the concepts more relatable. It is important to remember that the skills we want to teach, such as problem solving, like analytical thinking or even dribbling a basketball, they don't exist in isolation. Using purposeful context and learning activities, we can show our students where these skills are applicable and why they should know them. Simply put, we have to teach our content and then apply key elements of our course to real life examples our students can understand. We need to tie lessons from the curriculum to the students' social communities to make it more contextual and relevant. If you're reading a chapter in history class, for example, discuss why does it matter today in our schools, in our community, and then take the concept you're learning about and create a project that enables your students to draw those parallels. Another strategy that we can do is institute diverse texts and curricula. So developing an inclusive classroom and using culturally responsive pedagogy involves incorporating diverse texts and curricula. It's important for students of color and other students with marginalized identities to see their experiences reflected in the text and the lessons that they're receiving. Those exposed to diverse texts learn to take pride in their identities, which is going to lead to higher self-esteem in your classroom, better social emotional functioning, and increased classroom engagement, because what student doesn't want to hear a story about their backstory, right? Think about selecting a book for your class to read in which students with different cultural backgrounds could relate to and then feel like they're the expert. Take inventory of the books in your classroom library. Do they include authors of diverse races? And then think beyond your classroom library. Consider the posters you display on your walls or what you have hanging on your bulletin boards. These are small changes you can make to make your classroom more culturally responsive. And it's not just a matter of just incorporating a variety of texts from different cultures. Pay attention and survey your kids to really know what cultures are in your classrooms. So I'm half Korean, so I would love to see Korean text in my classroom, and I have Korean things in my room, but it's not going to be as impactful if I have students of Chinese and Japanese descent. So yes, they would like to see Asian cultures, but they want to see their culture. So be actively in looking at what things that you can put in your classroom that will engage your students. Next, we're going to talk about focus on building relationships. Relationship building is key to culturally responsive teaching. To build rapport with your own students, you need to ask questions. Ask them about their strengths. How do they learn best? Their personal and professional goals. Have them complete multiple intelligence surveys, complete learning goals. And what do they hope to get out of your course? You need to distribute questionnaires at the beginning of the year. Ask about their interests. Hand out those surveys, learning about information about them and their styles. Hold open discussions with your kids so they can communicate with each other, learn more about each other, allowing students to talk about positive experiences from their past classes so you can hear what worked for them and that is something that you can incorporate today. Work quickly to learn your student's name. I cannot even stress how important that is, because your students will feel empowered and respected when you call them by their name, because then they feel like you really know them. You need to work to build relationships with your students to ensure that they feel respected, valued, and seen for who they are. Building those relationships helps them build community within your classroom, and then most importantly, with each other. And when they respect each other, classroom engagement is there, learning can happen. And finally, we want to make sure that you are understanding your students' holistic needs. So yes, we are talking about Maslow's. Do your kids have their physiological needs met? Are they getting the food? Are they getting enough rest? Do they feel safe and secure? You will need to acknowledge the fact that your students face many obstacles regarding situations like housing and food insecurity, childcare, whether it's for themselves or they're providing it for their siblings, safety, relationships, mental health. All of this has to happen in order for you to be able to teach the way you want to teach in your classroom. So how can you be a culturally inclusive educator? Besides using those strategies, you need to create a classroom culture that is welcoming for all learners. Provide student choice on assignments. That's going to build off their strengths. Create lessons that connect the content to your students' culture and daily lives. Present content in multiple forms. We're talking about learning styles, videos, manipulatives, posters, diagrams, written text, auditory, and then intentionally address those visual, tactile, and auditory learners in your lessons, and allow your students to collaborate and work in groups. If they never get a chance to work together, they don't get to take on leadership roles or learn to listen to their classmates or build relationships and rapport. All of that needs to happen for you to be culturally inclusive. Next up, we have integrate relevant problems and projects. If there's something going on in the community, bring it into your history discussion. Bring it into your science project. Make sure there's cultural relevance in the word problems that you're doing in math. We have to communicate and work with our parents and guardians on a regular basis. We need to start with that positive phone call home at the very beginning of the year. We want to email our parents, send them those newsletters, let them know what's going on, what assignments are due. Have them get those text messages, set up those meetings when they're needed, send those positive notes home. We have to have our parents buy into what we're doing so that they'll support us when we're trying to help their kids. Use instructional materials that relate to a variety of cultures. I already addressed this a little bit. It's not enough just to have a whole bunch of multicultural texts. Make sure they're specific to the students in your classroom. That's where they're going to find that relevance. Bring in guest speakers. When we bring in guest speakers, we open career fields to our students. And how exciting is it for someone who loves rocks and minerals to have a geologist or mineralogist to come in and not only talk about their field, but look like your kids and come from the background of your kids, or be local so that they can see that this is a job they can actually realistically do. And speaking of jobs, we want to highlight authors, mathematicians, historians, and scientists of different cultures. I stress this in my lab. Yes, I talk about Newton. Yes, I talk about Einstein, but they're dead. They don't mean a whole lot to my kids. But when I find scientists who are young, who are paving new paths in their fields, and they're doing something that's different and unique, and they're from a different country or from their background culture, that's the sell for our kids. They want to see someone who looks like them and has given them the potential to have that same job. And then we also want to include multiple question formats on our assessments. Be careful that they're not biased so that we're truly checking to see if our students understand what we're doing in the classroom. All right, so we as educators have a unique power to impact the lives of our students. We know this, but we are going to have to make use of thoughtful, inclusive instruction because we know that has positive effects on our students and they last far beyond their time in our classroom. We need to employ cultural responsive teaching strategies because that is going to be a small step toward enacting meaningful change, not just our classrooms, and education. So your turn. You're going to pause the video and list what you're already doing to be a culturally inclusive teacher, but then more importantly, I want you to think about what more you can do and put it into action. I want to thank you so much for joining me in this professional development, the Learner Focused Classroom. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, Susan Nazario, at ccs.k12.nc.us. And I hope that you have an amazing school year. Take care.